Imagine standing in a freezer. Not just for a minute to grab some ice cream, but for days. Now imagine you have spent your entire life in a sauna. That is the reality for a group of elite warriors who traveled thousands of miles from the humid jungles of Southeast Asia to the frozen wilderness of northern Japan. This is the story of the Filipino Commandos, the best of the best. Men who can survive in swamps and rainforests with nothing but a knife, facing an enemy they had never met before. It wasn't a human enemy. It wasn't a tank or a drone. It was white. It was cold. And it was everywhere. This is the story of what happened when the masters of the jungle met the masters of the snow. You have to understand who these men are to appreciate the comedy and the challenge of this situation. The Philippine Marines and Special Forces are legendary. They are jungle experts. They train in heat that would make an average person pass out in 5 minutes. They are used to mosquitoes, humidity, muddy rivers, and dense green canopies that block out the sun. Their gear is designed to breathe. Their boots are designed to let water drain out. Their camouflage is a mix of green and black to vanish into the leaves. They are terrifyingly effective in their home turf. But then the call came. A joint training exercise with the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force. The location? Not the beaches of Okinawa, but the snow-covered forests of Niigata and Hokkaido. The mission? To learn how to fight and survive in sub-zero temperatures. For many of these hardened soldiers, this trip wasn't just a deployment. It was the first time they would ever see snow. As the transport plane began its descent towards the Japanese airbase, the mood inside was a mix of professional focus and nervous curiosity. They had been briefed, of course. They knew it would be cold. They had been issued thermal layers, heavy jackets, and thick gloves, equipment that felt bulky and alien compared to their usual lightweight fatigues. Looking out the small windows of the aircraft, the landscape shifted from the familiar blues of the ocean to a blinding, endless white. It looked like a different planet. When the ramp of the plane finally lowered, the air didn't just enter the cabin. It rushed in like a physical blow. It was dry, sharp, and bit at the exposed skin of their faces instantly. You could see the breath of every soldier puffing out like smoke, a novelty that never quite wears off for someone from the tropics. The first step onto the snowy tarmac was a moment of pure cinema. These are disciplined men, standing tall, weapons slung tight, faces stoic. But you could see the eyes widening. One by one, they stepped off the metal ramp and their boots crunched onto the hard-packed ice. It is a sound distinct to winter, that squeaky, dry crunch that signals extreme cold. For a soldier used to the squelch of mud, it was bizarre. They formed up in ranks, trying to maintain their bearing, but the wind was relentless. It cut through the layers they were wearing, finding every gap in their armor. The Japanese hosts were there to greet them, comfortable in their white winter camouflage, looking perfectly at home. The contrast was immediate. The Filipino troops, in their green digital camo, stood out like sore thumbs against the white backdrop. They were effectively neon signs in this environment, a tactical nightmare that they would have to address later. But for now, the priority was simply not freezing to death. The real magic happened when they were transported to the training area in the deep woods. This wasn't the plowed concrete of the airbase. This was deep, powdery snow. The trucks rumbled through forests where the trees were heavy with white drifts, looking like sculptures. When the commandos jumped off the trucks, some of them sank up to their knees. A few sank up to their waists. This was the first Priceless reaction. You saw tough, battle-hardened sergeants looking down at their legs, baffled by the fact that the ground had simply swallowed them. There was laughter. It was impossible not to laugh. The seriousness of the military exercise briefly gave way to the universal human experience of encountering something wonderful and strange. One soldier reached down, scooped up a handful of the white powder, and stared at it. It wasn't like ice from a freezer. It was soft, dusty. He squeezed it, and it turned into a hard ball. He looked at his buddy, a mischievous glint in his eye, and for a split second, you thought a snowball fight might break out right there among the special forces. They refrained barely, remembering they were on camera and on duty. But the wonder quickly turned into a logistical puzzle. Moving in the jungle is about silence and slow, deliberate steps to avoid breaking twigs. Moving in snow is an exhausting slog. Every step requires lifting your leg high to clear the drift. Your heart rate spikes. You sweat inside your heavy clothes, but if you stop moving, that sweat freezes against your skin, which can be deadly. The Japanese instructors, moving swiftly on skis and snowshoes, looked like they were floating. The Filipino troops looked like they were wading through molasses. The first hike was a brutal awakening. Men who could march for days in the heat found themselves gasping for air after a few kilometers. The cold air burns the lungs in a way humid air doesn't. It dries out the throat. It makes the nose run constantly. The training camp was set up to facilitate a transfer of knowledge. The Japanese soldiers, the experts of the North, were there to teach the experts of the South how to stay alive. The language barrier was bridged by hand signals and shared laughter. One of the most entertaining sessions was the introduction to skis. Imagine giving a pair of long, slippery planks to someone who has never seen ice, strapping them to their feet, and telling them to slide down a hill. It was a comedy of errors. The Filipino Commandos, who possess incredible balance and agility in their own element, found themselves flailing. Legs went in opposite directions. Poles flew into the air. Bodies hit the snow with soft thuds. But what made it impressive was their attitude. There was no frustration, no ego. When a soldier fell, he laughed, his squad mates cheered, and he got back up. This is the hallmark of elite units, adaptability. They didn't see the snow as an annoyance. They saw it as a puzzle to be solved. Within hours, the wobbly baby giraffe movements began to smooth out. They started to understand the center of gravity required for skiing. They learned to trust the slide rather than fight it. Another major hurdle was the weaponry. Metal reacts to cold. Gun oil thickens and turns into a glue-like sludge that can jam a rifle. Batteries in radios and optics drain twice as fast. Fingers, numb and wrapped in thick gloves, struggle to feel the trigger or manipulate the safety catch. The Filipino troops had to relearn how to handle their own weapons. They had to strip them down and apply special cold-weather lubricants. They had to practice shooting while wearing mittens, or learn the trick of cutting the trigger finger off the glove for better tactile control, sacrificing warmth for accuracy. During a live-fire drill, the sound of the gunshots was different too. The snow absorbs sound, making the cracks of the rifles sound flatter, shorter. The steam rising from the hot barrels was distinct, a visible signature that would give away their position in a real fight. Nights in the snow were a different beast entirely. In the jungle, you worry about snakes, insects, and staying dry. In the snow, you worry about the temperature dropping to levels that stop the human heart. The Japanese instructors taught them how to build snow caves and shelters. It seems counterintuitive to bury yourself in snow to stay warm, but snow is an excellent insulator. The Filipino soldiers were skeptical. Dig a hole in the freezing ground and sleep in it? It sounded like a death sentence. But they followed orders. They used shovels to carve out blocks, stacking them to block the wind. They insulated the ground with pine branches. When they crawled inside these makeshift igloos, they were shocked to find it was relatively quiet and significantly warmer than the outside air. They heated their rations, warm, savory stews that tasted like the best food on earth after a day of freezing. Sitting around a small fire or a stove, clutching warm cups of tea, the cultural exchange deepened. They swapped stories of their homelands. The Japanese described the harsh winters and the beauty of the cherry blossoms. The Filipinos described the white sand beaches, the typhoons, and the endless green tea. The climax of the visit was a force-on-force mock battle. This was the final exam. The Filipino team had to apply everything they had learned in a few short days. They donned white overgarments to cover their green camo, finally blending in with the environment. They moved on snowshoes, patrolling through a dense birch forest. The objective was to ambush a convoy. The patience they learned in the jungle translated well here. They knew how to wait. They lay buried in the snow drifts, invisible, their breathing controlled to minimize the vapor clouds. The cold was seeping into their bones, but their discipline held. When the target approached, they sprang the trap. It wasn't perfect. Movement was still a bit clumsy, and the reload speeds were slower than usual. But it was effective. They utilized the terrain, using snowbanks as cover, moving from tree to tree. The Japanese observers were nodding in approval. It takes years to master winter warfare, but these men had become functional in less than a week. After the exercise, there was a final ceremony. The mood was lighter, celebratory. The initial shock of the cold had faded, replaced by a newfound respect for the environment. The priceless reactions of the first day, the wide eyes, the tentative touches, the slipping and sliding, had evolved into a rugged competence. One Filipino officer remarked in an interview that the snow was a humble teacher. It didn't care how tough you were. If you didn't respect it, it would hurt you. He admitted that he missed the sun, he missed the heat, but he would never forget the silence and the beauty of the snowy forest. This documentary isn't just about soldiers training. It's about the human spirit's capacity to adapt. It is about the universal language of shared hardship. When you strip away the flags and the uniforms, you have men trying to survive against the elements. You have the humorous moments of failure and the satisfying moments of success. The image of a jungle warrior, wrapped in white, standing atop a snowy peak in Japan, is a powerful symbol of alliance and versatility. They came as strangers to the ice, looking at it with the wonder of children. They left as initiates, having conquered their own biological programming to operate in a world that was the polar opposite of their home. As they boarded the plane to head back to the Philippines, shedding the heavy parkas and thermal layers, you could sense the relief. They were going back to the heat. They were going back to the mosquitoes. And strangely enough, they seemed happy about it. But as the plane lifted off, banking over the white mountains one last time, many of them stayed glued to the windows, watching the frozen world disappear beneath the clouds. They were taking back more than just tactics. They were taking back stories of a white world that felt like a dream. They had walked in the freezer, and they had survived. And if you asked any of them if they would do it again, the answer, accompanied by a grin, would likely be, yes, but maybe with an extra pair of socks. The footage captured during this trip remains a testament to the bond between the two nations. It showed that no matter how different the environment, the warrior mindset remains constant. It also reminded us that even the toughest commandos are human. Seeing a grown man, a lethal operator, giggle because he slipped on a patch of ice serves to humanize the uniform. It bridges the gap between the civilian and the soldier. It makes us realize that experiencing something new, something drastically outside our comfort zone, evokes the same reaction in everyone, a mix of fear, awe, and eventually adaptation. The Filipino Commandos in Japan proved that you can take the soldier out of the jungle, and while you can't take the jungle out of the soldier, you can certainly teach him how to ski. The legacy of this visit continues in the training doctrines of the Philippine military. Lessons learned in the snow about insulation, equipment maintenance in extreme conditions, and thermal regulation have applications even in wet, cold, rainy seasons in the mountains of the Philippines. But the story that gets told around the barracks, the story that gets passed down to the new recruits, isn't about the tactical formations or the firing drills. It's about the snow. It's about the time Sergeant Santos tried to make a snow angel and got stuck. It's about the time Corporal Reyes tried to eat a snowflake and realized his tongue was numb. It is these moments, these priceless reactions, that define the experience. So, the next time you step out into a cold winter day and shiver, remember the men from the tropics who plunged headfirst into the deep freeze. Remember their shock, their laughter, and their triumph. It is a reminder that the world is a vast, diverse place, and there is always a new frontier to explore, even if it requires wearing 3 layers of pants. The Filipino Commandos came, they saw, they froze, and they conquered. And in doing so, they gave us a story that is as heartwarming as it is cool. The interaction between the locals and the visiting troops also added a layer of warmth to the freezing narrative. In the local towns near the base, the sight of the Filipino soldiers was a novelty. The locals, accustomed to the heavy snowfalls, were amused and charmed by the visitors' reactions. There were moments of cultural exchange over hot bowls of ramen, where the soldiers would try to explain the concept of 90% humidity to people who lived in a refrigerator. These interactions were filled with gestures and smiles, breaking down the stiff formality that usually surrounds military exercises. It showed that diplomacy isn't just about treaties signed by politicians in suits. It's about soldiers from different worlds sharing a meal and laughing about the weather. As the documentary crew packed up their gear, they knew they had captured something special. They hadn't just filmed a military drill. They had filmed a fish-out-of-water story with high stakes and heavy weapons. They captured the resilience of the human body and the flexibility of the human mind. The visuals of the green and black camouflage against the pristine white snow served as a constant visual reminder of the anomaly. It was a clash of colors, a clash of climates, but a harmony of purpose. The mission was readiness. The result was brotherhood. And what of the snow itself? It remains there, covering the mountains of Japan, indifferent to the visitors who came and went. But for those few days, it was a playground, a classroom, and a challenge for the men from the South. It tested them in ways bullets couldn't. It attacked their morale with cold, it attacked their dexterity with numbness, and it attacked their mobility with depth. But they pushed back. They adapted. They overcame. In the end, the visit of the Filipino Commandos to Japan's snowy forests serves as a perfect metaphor for life. We are often thrown into environments we are not prepared for. We face challenges that seem alien and insurmountable. We slip, we fall, we look foolish. But if we maintain our discipline, if we lean on our allies, and if we can find the humor in the struggle, we can survive anything. We can learn to ski on the slopes of adversity. We can build shelters in the storms of life. And we can come out the other side with a story that is truly priceless.